Hey there, so I'm just following up on my last video. It was a little bit meandering, and now that I've given it some thought and watched it over a few times, I realized that uh, there was the idea that was presented. I sort of walked the viewer through what I found to be the history of the developments in the space, but I didn't actually connect the dots between my explanation of the future, saying how Blender and related real-time VFX technologies may disintermediate Hollywood, and how we get there from today, right? So, the crux of the argument, basically, which I glossed over, and it should really be noted, is the fact that if you have real-time VFX and you have the ability to take these VFX and swap assets inexpensively or at no cost, then you have the ability for individuals in Blender and related technologies to real-time world build at low cost. You have software that risks disintermediating the real world. This is not a new phenomenon. This has basically been the last 40 years of the tech industry, and what comes to mind is the famous GIF that was put out by Andreessen Horowitz that showed the businessman's desk in 1980 and the businessman's desk today, and with every passing year on the GIF, different parts of the desk disappear because everything eventually lands in the laptop. So in the particular case here of Blender, what I did not explicitly state is that in a world where you have real-time rendering of VFX assets, and then you have an open source community that swaps these assets for low cost or no cost, then you have the ability for people with laptops to become their own film studios, right? And then you risk the real disintermediation of Hollywood, right? They historically were able to rule the roost for their business because they had the infrastructure and they had distribution and they had talent. Well, infrastructure, if you have software that can emulate the real world with very high fidelity, then that goes out the window because software that's open source is free. If you can render it cheaply on your computer, well, then there's no need for elaborate sets and studios. And Hollywood today risks disappearing like the famous studio system of Hollywood back in the day. So that's number one. Number two, distribution. The last 20 years in tech are a classic, well, not 20 years, but 15 years in the tech industry are a classic story of Hollywood, almost getting disintermediated. The rise of YouTube, the rise of Netflix, the rise of Amazon Prime. Obviously, that was more of a co-opting than a disintermediation, an evolution of the industry, but definitely put some people out of business. In this particular case, if people with VFX are able to produce these assets, obviously distribution channels are still major and still owned, but I in a world of YouTubes and Netflixes and Venmos, there's certainly likely to be more competitor distribution channels, whether it's the Snapchats or TikToks or the whatever of the world. And number three, talent. I think that goes without saying that there's a lot more acting and probably a lot more acting talent than that in the world than there is actual TV shows or films. Very famously, Canada is Vancouver is known as Hollywood North. And Canada has an incredibly robust and active acting scene, right? And those guys are able to take advantage of the opportunity to work for TV shows that are shot up there. So I just want to be very clear and explicit in threading the needle here that because of where Blender is at today, it could be very similar to where the open source movement was, circa the mid 90s or maybe early 2000s, and people being able to see the future and say, wait a second, what's happening here is very analogous, very similar to what happened in tech, 15, 20 years ago. I think there's a lot of opportunity to build around that. People with vision and people who see where this is going can say like, well, there's we can just shoot for being the Craigslist, and obviously Craigslist had a good exit, but we can also build out ton of the other verticals that were eventually unbundled, from Craigslist, everything from Airbnb to StubHub to dating apps to job apps, eBay, everything comes famously from the unbundling of Craigslist. So want to be explicit. Hope that's illuminating. And if there's any questions, comments, concerns, considerations, drop me a line. Thank you.